I gave everything to Lena and thought we had a future, until one day, everything shattered. A shocking betrayal, hidden secrets, and the unraveling of lies. This is the story of how I uncovered it all, and the ultimate revenge I took on the ones who destroyed my life. If you've ever wondered how far betrayal can go, stay tuned. My life with Lena started out as something simple, but it was everything I wanted. We met on one of those hot Austin nights in July. The air was thick, sticky, with that smell of grilled burgers and faint whiffs of someone's backyard barbecue. I was at a friend's housewarming party, more out of obligation than anything, standing off to the side with a drink in hand. Then I noticed her. She had this quiet confidence about her. Lena wasn't flashy, wasn't the loudest voice in the room, she was just there, laughing with some friends, looking like she belonged anywhere she went. I found myself walking over before I could even think it through. "Hey, I'm Ethan. Great party, right?" I said, nervously hoping I didn't sound like a complete idiot. She turned and smiled, and it was one of those smiles you feel deep in your gut. "It's not bad," she laughed, raising her drink. Though I think they forgot to turn on the AC. Or they're trying to see how long we'll all last in here before we melt. We hit it off that night, talking about everything from our favorite movies to our least favorite jobs. I learned she was working as an admin for a small law firm, and she had a knack for remembering even the tiniest details about people. The kind of person who makes you feel like you matter. And somehow, for reasons I still don't understand, she chose me. For about a year, we were inseparable. Weekends became our thing, going on hikes, watching old movies, hitting up every taco joint in town just to decide which one was the best. For the record, she swore by Veracruz tacos, and I still say Tyson's takes the cake. Our dates were nothing fancy, but that's what made them special. Just two people finding joy in being together. That first year flew by, and before I knew it, I was down on one knee, proposing at the spot where we'd had our first kiss, a little picnic area by Lady Bird Lake. When we got married, everything just fell into place. Lena and I moved into a small, modest house on the outskirts of Austin. It was far from perfect, but it was ours. I was working full-time as a mechanic, and Lena kept her job at the law firm. We'd stay up late some nights, dreaming out loud about what we wanted in life, making plans we'd scribble down on scraps of paper and tuck into the kitchen drawer. "Someday, we'll get a bigger place," Lena would say as she sipped her tea, curled up on the couch. "One with enough room for a garden. And maybe a dog." I'd laugh and shake my head. "You know, I think that sounds like a good plan. But what about that trip to Italy we talked about? You can't forget the pasta tour." "Oh, don't worry, that's still on the list," she'd grin, and we'd make up stories about all the places we'd go. Things felt good, normal, steady. Until that day I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I'd gotten involved in a gambling ring. It started innocently, with a few games here and there, but I was hooked on the thrill. The stakes were low at first, then they weren't. I told myself I'd get out before it got too deep, but I didn't see the cliff until I'd fallen off it. The night of the raid was a blur. I was cuffed, thrown into the back of a patrol car, and dragged through the process that only feels real when you're behind bars. I didn't think about what it would mean for Lena until I was sitting in that tiny cell, staring at a gray wall. I'd left her to deal with the fallout, left her to pick up the pieces of our life. My own regrets weighed heavy, but it was the thought of her that tore me up. The first visit she made, I could barely look her in the eyes. She showed up that Sunday, just 2 days after they'd locked me up. I still remember how she looked sitting across from me, so calm and collected, like she was trying to keep it together for both of us. She held the phone to her ear on the other side of the glass partition, and when I picked up, I had to fight to keep it together. "I'm sorry, Lena. I messed up. I don't even know where to start." "Ethan, don't," she said softly, her voice breaking. "We'll get through this. I just need you to focus on getting better. For us." Her words were like a bomb, making me believe that maybe we could find our way back to what we had. She came every weekend for the first couple of months. Every visit, she'd bring a bit of the outside world with her, a story about her coworkers, or about the new paint colors she picked for the spare room. She was trying to keep our life alive, even when I was miles away from it. But prison takes its toll, even on the people who aren't behind bars. I started to notice little changes. Lena's visits grew shorter, her stories more distant. She began missing weekends, and when she did show up, she seemed distracted, like there was somewhere else she'd rather be. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel something slipping away. One day, when she came, she barely touched the phone, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I picked up the receiver, my heart pounding as I waited for her to speak. "I almost didn't come today, Ethan," she finally said, her eyes focused on a spot on the floor. It's just hard. Being here, watching you like this. I feel like you're slipping away." "Lena, please," I begged, pressing my hand against the glass, wishing I could reach her. "Just hold on. When I get out of here, things'll be different. We'll get back to where we were. I swear." But she shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. "I don't know if that's possible, Ethan. You're here, and I'm out there. And every day, it feels like we're growing apart. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending like everything's okay." Those words hit me harder than anything else. Sitting in that cell, knowing I had no control over what was happening between us, I could feel our life slipping through my fingers, no matter how much I wanted to hold on to it. Weeks turned into months, and her visits all but stopped. I'd count the days, hope each week that she'd show up, that I'd see her face again, hear her voice telling me it'd be okay. But she stopped coming, and eventually, I stopped waiting. It's strange, looking back. There was this life we'd planned, a life we'd started building together. And then, in what felt like an instant, it was gone. Prison has a way of stretching time. Days blur together, the routine numbs you, and you start to wonder if the world outside even remembers you exist. For a long while, what kept me going was the thought of Lena. I believed, despite everything, that our bond would outlast the walls between us. But there were moments, late at night, when doubts crept in. I'd stare at the ceiling, trying to shake the questions. Was she really waiting for me? Could I trust her? The uncertainty ate at me. It was around Thanksgiving when I got a letter from my oldest friend, Derek. Derek and I grew up together in Austin, and even when life took us in different directions, he was always there. When I landed myself in trouble, he didn't judge or abandon me, he just kept checking in. He knew Lena too, and he promised to look out for her while I was away. His letters usually talked about life back home, the latest news, funny stories from the neighborhood, bits and pieces of normalcy that gave me a glimpse of the life I was missing. But this letter was different. At first, it was the usual Derek style, sarcasm, jokes, stories about the latest neighborhood drama. But a few paragraphs in, he got serious. Derek said he'd seen Lena around town recently, and she hadn't been alone. She'd been with a man named Victor, someone we both knew by reputation. Victor wasn't just anybody. He was a big-time business guy in Austin, one of those men who seems to know everyone and has a hand in everything. Rich, powerful, charming in that way only people who get what they want tend to be. Victor and I had crossed paths before at charity events or local gatherings. I never thought much of him, but I definitely didn't imagine him showing up in my life like this. Derek described what he'd seen. Lena and Victor were out at a popular bar downtown, tucked away in a quiet corner, and from what he could tell, it wasn't a casual meeting. They weren't just two acquaintances grabbing a quick drink. According to Derek, they looked comfortable, too comfortable. Lena was laughing in that easy, genuine way I knew all too well. Victor's hand lingered a little too long on her arm, his gaze a little too familiar. Derek had even managed to snap a quick photo, grainy but enough to recognize their faces. When I saw it, my heart sank. It was Lena, all right, and she looked happy. I couldn't breathe for a second. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the way Derek described it didn't leave much room for doubt. He said he almost hadn't told me, afraid of what it might do to me, but he figured I had the right to know. "Maybe it's nothing," he wrote, trying to soften the blow. But it's best you keep your eyes open. I spent the next few nights trying to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe they just ran into each other. Maybe it was an innocent night out. I wanted to believe Lena wouldn't do this to me. But something about that picture, about Derek's words, ate at me. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was like this gnawing truth that I didn't want to face. But I needed more proof. I needed to know for sure. So I wrote back to Derek, asking him to keep an eye out, to let me know if he saw anything else. A few weeks later, Derek sent another letter, and this time, he didn't hold back. He told me he'd seen Lena and Victor out together multiple times now. Once at an upscale restaurant downtown, another time at a gallery event that was definitely not work-related. Derek mentioned they looked like a couple, laughing, touching, completely at ease with each other. He'd even overheard Lena mention a weekend business trip she had planned with Victor. A business trip. I felt the blood drain from my face. Lena had told me countless times how she hated traveling for work, how she'd avoid trips whenever she could. But now, here she was, jetting off to God knows where with Victor, claiming it was for work. It was almost like she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. With Derek's latest letter, he included a few more photos he'd managed to take. One showed Lena and Victor sharing a glass of wine at a dimly lit table, her hand resting on his. Another captured them leaving the restaurant, Victor's arm wrapped around her waist. I looked at those photos until my vision blurred, feeling something inside me break. She looked carefree, like the woman I fell in love with. It was as if I was looking at a version of her I didn't know, someone who had moved on while I was still trapped in my past. I spent that night replaying everything in my mind. The early days of our relationship, the promises we'd made, the life we'd built together. And here she was, throwing it all away with some smooth-talking businessman. The hurt twisted into something uglier, something I didn't want to acknowledge. It was resentment, anger that burned so deep I could feel it searing through my chest. She'd made her choice, left me to rot in here while she was out there living a new life, as if I'd never mattered. After that, my days in prison felt different. I still went through the routine, meals, work shifts, roll calls, but there was this cold distance inside me, like something vital had shut down. I stopped looking forward to anything. Visits from Lena became rare, and when she did come, I couldn't bring myself to ask her about Victor. She'd sit across from me, talking about work or mentioning how busy things had gotten, and all I could think about was that she was lying. Right to my face. I stopped responding, just nodded along, letting her words drift over me like white noise. The other guys in here noticed the change in me. Some asked if I was alright, but most just let it be. I think they recognized that kind of pain, the kind that settles in your bones and doesn't leave. Nights were the worst, lying on that hard bunk, replaying every word, every visit, every broken promise in my mind. It was a kind of torture no prison guard could ever enforce. I don't know what I was expecting that day, really. Maybe some sign that there was still a trace of the woman I thought I knew, something that would convince me she wasn't just moving on. But when Lena walked into the prison's visitor area, dressed like she was going out for a high-end brunch, I knew something was wrong. The woman I saw that day looked polished, put together, like she was on her way to a business lunch, not a prison. As she settled into the chair across from me, her bright red lipstick perfectly applied, a pain of frustration hit me. Who was she trying to impress in here? I thought, feeling a rush of irritation. I picked up the phone and waited as she did the same, trying to gauge her expression. There was a smile there, but it looked practiced, like it was part of some show. I forced a smile myself, leaning into the game she was playing. It's been a while, Lena, I started, keeping my voice soft but firm. Feels like I've been counting the days. You know, I missed seeing you. Lena's face softened a little, and she tilted her head as if to show sympathy. Oh, Ethan, I know. It's been tough for me too. Believe me, I've missed you. Work's just been a nightmare. They've got me doing double duty these days, traveling everywhere. I raised an eyebrow. Everywhere? You must be the most valuable person they've got if they're keeping you that busy." She laughed, a short, bright laugh that echoed in the cold room, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, it's been a lot. They're lucky I haven't walked out." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "So, you're flying all over for these big work trips, meeting a lot of new people, I imagine?" She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the collar of her blouse. "You know how it is. Lots of handshakes, lots of meetings, nothing too exciting." I wanted to push, to ask her about Victor, about the nights out and the photos Derek had sent. But instead, I just nodded, trying to keep the tension from showing. "I bet. Life on the outside must be a lot busier than it is in here." Her smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered, leaning in as if we were sharing a private joke. "You know I'd rather be here with you than out dealing with all those people. You say that now, but you don't know what it's like to be in here." I couldn't help it, there was an edge to my voice, a bitterness I hadn't meant to show. "It's just... I've been thinking, Lena. It's not easy to wait this long for someone, especially when life's moving fast out there for you." She looked down, a slight blush rising on her cheeks. "Ethan, don't talk like that. You know I'm here for you, no matter how long it takes." There it is, I thought, that empty promise. I'd clung to it for months, but now it sounded as hollow as it felt. I looked her right in the eye, feeling a surge of frustration rise up. "Really? You're here, no matter what? Because it's just... I don't know, Lena. Sometimes it feels like I'm just another item on your to-do list, like you're checking in because you have to, not because you want to." Lena's face changed, her brows knitting together as if she was truly hurt. "How can you say that? You think I don't want to be here? Ethan, I love you. I'm doing this for us." I let out a humorless laugh. "For us? What's for us, Lena? Because right now, I'm just here, doing my time, while you're out there living life. And if I'm being honest, it doesn't feel like there's an us left. Not from where I'm sitting." She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room as if worried someone might be listening. "Look, I know it's hard, okay? But what do you expect me to do, Ethan? I have a life out there, responsibilities. I can't just pause everything because you're in here." Her words stung, and I felt a flash of anger. But instead of lashing out, I kept my tone calm, my voice barely above a whisper. "I get it. I really do. I'm not saying you have to pause everything. But it would be nice if you'd at least let me in, tell me the truth. Because right now, it feels like you're hiding something." She went rigid, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Hiding something? What are you trying to say?" I hesitated, taking a slow breath. This was it. I could either confront her outright or keep playing this game. Part of me wanted to call her out on Victor, on everything I'd heard and seen. But another part of me, the part that still held on to some sliver of hope, couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I looked down, shaking my head. "Forget it," I said, my voice barely a murmur. "Maybe it's just the prison talking, making me paranoid. I just need to know I can trust you, that's all." Lena's expression softened, and she reached out, pressing her hand against the glass. "You can trust me, Ethan. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." But as I looked into her eyes, I realized I couldn't believe her. There was a part of me that wanted so badly to accept her words at face value. But deep down, I knew they were just that, words. Words she said because she thought it was what I wanted to hear. I pressed my hand against the glass, mirroring hers. "All right," I said, forcing a small smile. "I'll hold you to that." She smiled back, but there was something off about it, something distant, like she was already thinking of somewhere else she'd rather be. As the guards signaled the end of our visit, Lena stood up, adjusting her coat and brushing a hand over her hair. She looked at me one last time, her smile tight, almost rehearsed. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. I'll be back soon." "Yeah," I replied, my voice hollow. I'll be here." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me staring at the empty chair across from me, feeling a strange mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. I sat there long after she'd gone, wondering how much longer I could keep pretending, how much longer I could let her keep lying to me. Every time I'd return to my cell after a visit with Lena, I'd sit on the edge of my bunk, clutching Derek's letters and staring at those pictures of her and Victor. Each photo was like a slap in the face, Lena and Victor out to dinner, laughing, looking like a couple in love, walking close with his hand on her back. And with every one, I'd feel a fresh wave of anger and betrayal. But I kept quiet. I didn't say a word about what I knew. I played along, kept up the pretense, and bided my time. If I learned one thing in here, it was how to be patient. My release date was inching closer. I spent my free time thinking through my plan, trying to decide how to confront her, but I wanted to get more information, to be sure there were no surprises. At the next visit, I decided to test the waters a little, to see if she'd give me any hint of what was going on. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind where the Texas sun shines through everything, even the glass of the visitors' area. Lena walked in looking polished as ever, wearing a crisp blue blouse and a silver bracelet I'd given her years ago for our anniversary. It was almost ironic, she looked the part of a perfect, loyal wife. I took a deep breath, ready to keep my cool. As soon as she picked up the phone, she flashed me that same familiar smile, but I could feel something was off. "Hey, Ethan. It's so good to see you. How are you holding up?" I leaned back, keeping my tone casual. "Oh, one day at a time. But what about you? You doing all right? I hope you've got some people around you, friends, family, someone to lean on." She nodded, looking down, almost bashful. "Yeah, I'm doing okay. Work keeps me busy. I've got some good friends at the office, they help keep things light." I nodded, my eyes on her, waiting for the right moment. "That's good to hear. Really. I hope you're not going through this alone." I paused, then added, trying to sound as innocent as possible, "Anyone special looking out for you? Someone who's making sure you're holding up all right?" For a split second, she looked surprised, maybe even caught off guard, but she quickly brushed it off with a light laugh. "Well, I do have some supportive coworkers. A couple of them have really stepped up, actually. Just friends though, Ethan. You don't need to worry about me." I watched her closely, trying to hide the resentment boiling under my calm exterior. Her words were almost too smooth, her smile a little too forced, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I managed to keep my voice steady, even though every instinct screamed at me to call her out. "Well, that's a relief," I said, trying to sound genuinely reassured. I just want to make sure someone's got your back while I'm here. I'd hate to think you're dealing with all this by yourself." She softened a bit, almost as if she bought my concern. "I appreciate that, even. It's hard sometimes, but I'm managing. I just focus on work and take things day by day." I forced myself to nod, even managing a small smile. "Good. It's good to have people around." I leaned forward, letting my tone drop a little, adding just a hint of sincerity. "Just promise me, Lena, if anything ever, got serious with someone, you'd tell me. I'd like to know." Her eyes flickered for a second, and her smile grew tighter. She swallowed, but quickly recovered, chuckling nervously. "Ethan, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you. This is just a rough patch, but we'll get through it. There's no one else." But as she spoke, I could tell she was lying, almost as if she'd convinced herself that the lie was somehow justified. I felt a wave of bitterness wash over me. She was standing right in front of me, saying one thing but living an entirely different life. "All right," I said, my voice calm, almost relaxed. "I trust you, Lena. I just miss you, is all." She gave me that same rehearsed smile, nodding as if she had everything under control. But as I looked at her, I realized I didn't feel hurt anymore. I didn't feel sad. all I felt was cold, determined. She'd made her choice, and now, I was making mine. I'd spent weeks planning this, laying the groundwork, talking to Derek, and going over every possible way to make sure it was Lena and Victor who'd end up in chaos, not me. Sitting there in that prison visiting room, I was calm on the outside, but inside, I felt a kind of resolve I hadn't felt in years. I took a deep breath, looked at Lena, and reminded myself to play it cool. As soon as she sat down across from me, I could tell she wasn't her usual composed self. She was fiddling with her ring, her eyes darting around, not really meeting mine. I picked up the phone to start the conversation, trying to sound relaxed, almost friendly. So, I began, giving her a small smile. How's everything been going? You look a little tense. She pressed her lips together, forcing a polite smile. It's been a lot, Ethan, she admitted, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. Work has been, stressful. Just a lot going on. Stressful? I tilted my head, trying to look surprised. You usually handle pressure pretty well, Lena. What's got you so worked up? She sighed, lowering her voice, though I could still hear the frustration in it. It's just, everything at the office has become so unpredictable. Victor's been on edge constantly, dealing with one issue after another. And it's starting to spill over into everything. I leaned in a little, faking concern. Sounds rough. I guess running a big business can be risky, huh? She nodded quickly, her fingers still fidgeting with her ring. It's just strange. One minute everything was fine, and then all of a sudden, these issues come out of nowhere. And no one knows why. Victor's saying that it's probably some competitor trying to dig up trouble, but it's been exhausting. I fought the urge to smile. This was exactly what I'd been waiting to hear. But I kept my expression neutral, nodding thoughtfully. Well, that's the business world, right? You think you're on top one day, and the next, things can start slipping. I guess you have to be careful who you trust. Lena hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. What do you mean? I shrugged, acting like it was nothing. You know, just that it's easy to take things for granted. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you have to watch out for. I glanced down, pretending to pick at my fingernails as if it was just idle conversation. You wouldn't believe how many people in here ended up behind bars because of people they thought they could trust. She shifted in her seat, clearing her throat. Victor's, he's fine. He's just under a lot of pressure, and I guess it's gotten to him. I'm trying to help him, but it's like every time we turn around, there's something else. That's rough, I said, sounding genuinely sympathetic. But you've got this, Lena. I mean, you've always been good at staying strong when things get tough. Just, make sure you're watching out for yourself, too. She nodded slowly, like she was mulling it over. Yeah. I guess I just didn't expect things to get this chaotic. It feels like everything is falling apart. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to say more, then sighed again. I just wish I understood what's causing all of this. I forced a small chuckle, shaking my head. Well, maybe it's a sign, you know? Sometimes things have to fall apart so we can see what's really worth holding on to. I glanced at her, watching for any sign that she was catching on. She bit her lip, looking at me intently. Ethan, sometimes I feel like you're different, like you're holding something back. I looked at her, keeping my face as blank as I could. What do you mean? I don't know, she murmured, almost to herself. It's just a feeling. I can't explain it, but sometimes I feel like there's more going on than you're telling me. She shook her head, laughing nervously. Maybe I'm just imagining things. I leaned forward, giving her my most innocent look. Lena, you know everything there is to know. I mean, what could I possibly be hiding in here? I let out a small laugh, hoping it sounded genuine. I'm just trying to survive day to day. The world out there, that's your domain now. She relaxed a little, giving a small, embarrassed smile. Yeah, I guess that sounds silly. Things feel off, that's all. I nodded, keeping my face calm. Look, Lena, you don't have to worry about me. I'm in here, I can handle myself. I think you should focus on what you have out there. I'll be here when you need me, but don't let what's going on with me keep you from living your life. She looked at me, her eyes softening a bit, like she felt relieved. Thank you, Ethan. I needed to hear that. She smiled, though it was tinged with something else, maybe a hint of guilt. You know, I just want you to be happy, I continued. If that means you are focusing on work, then that's what I want too. I paused, pretending to consider my words. And you know, maybe it's time to reevaluate some of the people around you. Like Victor, seems like the pressure's getting to him, and that's not your responsibility to carry. Her face tightened, and she nodded slightly. You're right. It's just hard to know who you can really trust sometimes. I nodded slowly. Funny, I was thinking the same thing. As my release date crept closer, I made a choice that surprised even me. I wasn't going to tell Lena I was getting out. Instead, I'd keep it quiet and come back on my own terms, slipping into the world she thought she'd rebuilt without me, giving her no time to prepare. Over the months, I'd put together a plan that was becoming more detailed with every piece of information I got. Derek had been my eyes on the outside, but as things moved forward, I started relying on a few others too, people I could trust to dig up what I needed without asking too many questions. Derek had been keeping tabs on Lena and Victor, but the new information he'd gathered went beyond dinners and hand-holding. It turned out that Lena hadn't just been sneaking around, she'd also been dipping into our joint accounts. The accounts that we'd opened together back when things were simple, for the house, for savings, money we'd planned to use for our future. Now, it was funding nights out with Victor, some luxury spa trips, and who knows what else. Derek pulled together bank statements and flagged every questionable withdrawal, making sure I'd have a full picture when the time came. Hey man, Derek said in one of his letters, I don't know if you want to hear this, but she's spending like crazy. Trips to high-end restaurants, boutique hotels in the city, even some expensive jewelry purchases. It's like she's forgotten that money was supposed to be for you too. Just say the word, and I'll keep digging. I wrote him back right away, telling him to go ahead. If Lena wanted to act like our savings were hers to burn, I'd be the one to let her know that the game was over. I wanted every receipt, every transaction, everything that would show me just how deep her betrayal went. Victor, on the other hand, was proving to be an even bigger piece of work. The more we looked into him, the more he came across as one of those slick, high-rolling business types who built his empire by staying one step ahead of everyone else. Derek found out he was tied to a couple of shady deals, barely legal investments, and a network of people who seemed to look the other way whenever he did something questionable. Victor's style wasn't outright criminal, but he had connections that went high up in the city's power circles. He'd mastered the art of using money and influence to keep people around him loyal or quiet. And Lena, well, she was just another pawn in his little empire. The worst part? It looked like she was falling for it. She probably thought she was living some glamorous life now, swept off her feet by this big-shot businessman, completely blind to the fact that he was playing her too. She'd swapped out her values for a chance at his luxury lifestyle, not even realizing that she was just another woman he could buy. About 2 weeks before my release date, Derek sent me a message through one of our mutual friends who came to visit. The note was short, but it was packed with the final pieces I needed to see the whole picture. Heard through the grapevine that Victor's been hosting some private gatherings, high-profile guests, you know the type. Lena's been tagging along, acting like she's made it into the big leagues. But I've got contacts who say he's been pushing his own agenda behind the scenes, including a few illegal investments. We can use this to hit him hard if that's what you're aiming for. I knew then that the timing was perfect. I'd come out of this quietly, not as a victim but as someone ready to confront them both head-on. My plan was nearly complete, and with the evidence I'd gathered, I could show Lena exactly what her life with Victor was built on: lies, manipulation, and a shaky foundation that would come crumbling down at the slightest push. The days leading up to my release were some of the longest I'd ever known. but I didn't want to waste a minute of my freedom settling into a quiet life. I wanted to come out swinging. The day I walked out of prison was a crisp autumn morning, early November. The trees around Austin were just starting to change, a rare sight in Texas, with hints of red and yellow here and there. I took it as a good sign. Things were shifting, and I was ready. My head was clear, my plan was in place, and now, it was all about timing. I didn't go home. Didn't call Lena, didn't even let her know I was out. I kept things quiet, like a ghost slipping back into the life I'd been shut out of. For a few days, I stayed with an old buddy from school, just long enough to set up a place of my own, out of sight, out of mind, and definitely out of her reach. My first target was Victor's business. Derek had given me more than enough ammo, deals that looked spotless on the surface but crumbled with just a little digging. Victor wasn't exactly breaking the law outright, he was more like one of those guys who knew exactly where the gray areas were. He had contracts that hinted at payoffs, insider trades, and questionable land deals. The kind of stuff that could stay hidden until someone shone a light on it, and that's exactly what I intended to do. I didn't just hand the files to the authorities. I wanted to make Victor sweat, to make him and Lena look over their shoulders, wondering who was out to get them. So, I started small. First, I dropped anonymous tips to a couple of his competitors in the business world, companies he'd muscled out or undercut to climb his way up. The information was just enough to raise suspicion, just enough to get people talking. A few whispers here, a few concerned glances there. Rumors have a way of spreading, and it wasn't long before people started asking questions. Within days, there were talks in the business circles about an investigation, and Victor's name was in the middle of it. Lena was right there with him, I'm sure, smiling through the strain, probably wondering who could be targeting them. But they wouldn't know it was me, not yet. One afternoon, Derek sent me a message through our usual network. He'd caught word that Victor had called a private meeting with his closest associates, trying to shore up his defenses and put out the fires I'd started. They're saying Victor's paranoid, Derek wrote. He's called in his lawyer and his financial team. Whatever you did, it's got him on edge. It was exactly the response I was aiming for. I wanted them shaken, off balance, and slowly losing control. But I wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, I leaked a little more, just enough to keep the pressure on, but never enough for them to figure out where it was coming from. One day it was a suspicious invoice leaked to the media, the next day an anonymous report to the SEC about insider trading. Bit by bit, the walls were closing in, and from where I stood, Victor's once solid empire looked ready to fall. Around the same time, I started hearing rumors that Lena wasn't handling the pressure well. Word had it that she looked anxious and distracted, her usual polished facade slipping. I could only imagine what was going through her mind, trying to juggle her image with a man she thought would keep her secure. Every step of the way, I stayed one move ahead, watching from the sidelines as their perfect world started cracking. By December, Derek let me know that Victor's legal team was scrambling. He was paying out of pocket to keep certain information under wraps, even shelling out bribes to keep the more suspicious deals from surfacing. But there was only so much he could do when every week seemed to bring a new issue out of nowhere. And that was the beauty of it. With each piece of information I let slip, Victor and Lena would wonder, they'd look around at each other, at their team, wondering who was feeding their secrets to the wolves. Victor's life was unraveling faster than even I expected. The pressure was clearly getting to him, and it was only a matter of time before he cracked. Derek had kept me updated, sending little details of how Victor had become increasingly paranoid, seeing threats in every shadow. But what really piqued my interest was hearing that he'd started taking out his frustration on Lena. One night, in the heart of winter, the scene finally hit its breaking point. Victor's swanky condo overlooked downtown Austin, where the nightlife glittered below, all indifferent to his crumbling empire. Inside, though, it was anything but glamorous. Victor was pacing, his face red, his shirt unbuttoned and rumpled, a rare sight for a man who usually kept himself meticulously put together. His frustration was palpable, and Lena stood off to the side, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Do you even understand what's happening here, Lena? He snarled, his voice rising, echoing through the otherwise quiet room. I am bleeding money. I've got lawyers, auditors, and God knows who else combing through my finances like vultures, and all you can do is stand there pretending you're innocent? Lena's hands trembled, and she tried to keep her voice steady, but there was a quiver to it, a telltale sign of her own panic. Victor, I don't know what you're talking about. How can you say this is my fault? I've been here for you, supported you through all of this. Victor laughed, but it was a bitter, empty sound. He slammed his hand against the wall, his patience entirely gone. Oh, supported me? Really? Because from where I'm standing, you're looking like the common denominator in every problem I've had for months. Lena took a shaky step forward, desperation in her eyes. Victor, that's not fair. I have done everything you asked. I've given up everything for you. Don't turn this on me. He rolled his eyes, scoffing at her words. Of course you would say that. You know what I think? I think you're a distraction. You come in here, with your needs and your wants, but you don't care about what this has cost me. You wanted a life of luxury, Lena? Well, welcome to the reality of it. It's crumbling. Her voice cracked, tears now running down her cheeks as she struggled to make sense of his accusations. Victor, what do you want from me? I've done nothing but love you. I left everything for you. How can you think this is my fault? He took a menacing step closer, his face twisted with contempt. Love me? Love doesn't cost me my career. Love doesn't bring scandal and investigators into my business. Maybe I was too blind to see it before, but ever since you walked into my life, things have gone downhill. The words stung, and she stumbled back, clutching her chest as though physically wounded. Victor, please, she whispered, barely able to hold herself together. You're blaming me for things I had nothing to do with. Victor crossed his arms, his expression hard and unyielding. Then explain to me why everything started going wrong after you came along. Because from where I'm standing, you've been nothing but a bad omen. Lena's voice dropped, choked with emotion. You don't mean that. You can't. He looked away, his face a mask of anger and frustration. Can I? Or maybe it's time you take a good look at your own life, Lena. I don't know who you've angered or what baggage you're carrying, but I don't have time to play guessing games anymore. Lena was shattered, barely holding back her sobs. She thought she was stepping into a new world, that Victor would offer her stability, security, a place she could leave her past behind. But here he was, ready to throw her away the second things got rough. She tried one last time, her voice a desperate whisper. Victor, please. We can work through this. I thought you cared about me. His gaze turned cold, and he took a step back, shaking his head. Care? I care about my company, my reputation. You think I'm going to let you, or anyone, bring me down? You're just another part of the mess, Lena, and right now, I can't afford any more problems. Lena, her face streaked with tears, stared at him in utter disbelief. The life she thought she had built was nothing but a mirage. It was late February, the last chill of winter still in the air when I set my plan into motion. I'd been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to confront them, and by now, I knew Victor and Lena were on the edge, their lives barely holding together. I'd chosen a restaurant in downtown Austin, one of those fancy spots with dim lighting, soft jazz in the background, and servers who knew your name. It was the place they'd used to go to when they were living the high life, back when they thought no one knew what they were up to. That night, though, things would be different. I walked in, dressed in a simple black jacket, looking more like myself than I had in years. Derek had tipped me off about the reservation. Sure enough, there they were, seated at a corner table, leaning in close but looking tense. Lena's face was pale, her usual confidence gone, and Victor's jaw was clenched, his eyes darting around as if he half expected trouble to walk right in the door. And that's exactly what happened. I walked toward their table slowly, letting the seconds stretch out. Lena saw me first, and I watched the color drain from her face as her eyes widened. She froze, the wine glass slipping from her hand, nearly tipping over. Victor noticed her reaction and turned around, his expression hardening as soon as he recognized me. Well, I said, stopping right in front of them, crossing my arms. This is quite the reunion, isn't it? Victor shot up from his seat, his face a mix of anger and shock. What do you think you're doing here? He snarled, glancing around the room as though checking if anyone was watching. Haven't you caused enough trouble? Oh, I think there's room for a bit more, I replied coolly, keeping my eyes locked on his. Seems like trouble is just beginning, for you, at least. Lena's voice came out barely above a whisper, her hands shaking as she reached for her glass. Ethan, how did you even get out? I tilted my head, giving her a look of feigned innocence. Oh, I've been out for a while. Funny how you didn't even notice. I mean, it's not like you bothered to check. Victor's face twisted, his composure slipping by the second. You think you're clever, don't you? Showing up here like some hero in a cheap movie. But I know what you've been doing, sabotaging my deals, stirring up investigations. Clever? I smirked. No, Victor. Just thorough. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. And I bet you didn't see this coming. All that scheming, all that charm. It didn't save you, did it? He clenched his jaw, fists balled up as he glared at me. You've got some nerve. Coming in here and acting like you're untouchable. This isn't over, you think I'll just roll over? I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Victor, you're finished. Your little empire, the reputation you built on lies and manipulation, it's all crumbling, and it's about time you accepted it. I turned to Lena, who was staring down at her hands, unable to look me in the eye. And you? I wonder if you realize just how deeply you've sunk. Lena's lip quivered as she looked up at me, her voice barely audible. Ethan, please. I didn't mean, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Oh, really? I snapped, letting the anger seep into my tone. Wasn't supposed to be like this? How exactly was it supposed to be, Lena? You left me a rot while you ran off with him. Spent our savings on dinners, vacations, jewelry, all the while thinking I'd never find out. She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. Ethan, I thought we were done. I thought you'd never forgive me. You thought wrong. I leaned in, my voice steady and cold. Because now, it's your turn to pay the price. Victor let out a bitter laugh, crossing his arms. Oh, give me a break. You think you're some avenging angel, Ethan? You're a joke. You'll never. But he didn't get to finish. Right on cue, two police officers entered the restaurant, their uniforms standing out against the polished interior. They walked straight over to us, and I stepped aside, watching Victor's expression shift from anger to panic. Mr. Victor Stenson, one of the officers said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest for financial fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice. Victor backed up, his eyes wide, raising his hands in disbelief. Wait. There must be some mistake. You can't do this, I'm Victor Stenson. You know who I am? The officer didn't miss a beat. Yeah, we know exactly who you are, Mr. Stenson. He grabbed Victor's arm, locking the cuffs around his wrists. And we've got enough evidence to prove it. Let's go. Victor whipped his head toward Lena, desperation in his eyes. Lena, tell them they're wrong. Call my lawyer, get me out of this. But Lena didn't move. She was paralyzed, her mouth open, her gaze fixed on the ground. She whispered, barely loud enough to hear, I can't. Victor looked at her in disbelief. You're just going to sit there? I watched, feeling the satisfaction of seeing his world fall apart as they let him out, his protests fading into the background. Lena sat frozen, her face ashen, her world collapsing just as much as his. She finally looked up at me, her voice small and broken. Ethan, was all of this really you? Every deal, every piece of it? I nodded slowly, savoring the moment. That's right, Lena. I wanted you both to see exactly what it feels like to lose everything. She looked down, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, I thought you'd hate me, but I didn't know you'd go this far. I let out a hollow laugh. You thought wrong. Enjoy the life you've chosen, Lena. Looks like it's just you now. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the ruins of the world she'd helped destroy. As the weeks turned into months, the fallout from my plan continued to ripple through their lives, leaving a path of quiet, irreversible destruction. Victor's arrest had sent shockwaves through the business community. His name, once a staple in Austin's elite circles, became shorthand for scandal. His companies were gutted, assets seized, and he faced a lengthy court battle with little hope of emerging unscathed. It wasn't long before he was entirely alone, abandoned by the people who had once sung his praises. Every attempt to appeal or cut a deal failed, the evidence against him was rock solid. And then there was Lena. Without Victor's financial security and social connections, she found herself completely adrift. She tried to pick up the pieces, of course. She made calls, reached out to her former network, hoping someone would take pity on her. But Austin's social scene can be unforgiving, and people who once pretended to be her friends stopped returning her calls, cut off contact, and distanced themselves from her entirely. She sold her jewelry, some designer clothes, anything she could, but it barely made a dent. Creditors started calling, and she quickly realized she couldn't sustain even a fraction of the life she had been living. One evening, as I was packing up to leave Austin for good, I drove past her old apartment. The lights were off, the once bustling place now dark and silent. Word had it she'd been evicted a week earlier, and in a cruel twist, had returned to her hometown to stay with a distant cousin who'd reluctantly taken her in. I couldn't help but feel a bittersweet satisfaction, knowing she'd finally come face to face with the consequences of her choices. All the nights of fine dining, the luxurious vacations, the jewelry, it was all gone. And in its place was a life stripped bare, down to the core, leaving her with nothing but regrets and an empty, hollow silence. My own journey wasn't without its complications. As I left Austin, the weight of what had happened lingered like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I'd told myself that revenge would make things right, and in a way, it had. But it had come at a price, a part of me that I couldn't get back. Trust was a fragile thing, and I'd seen how quickly it could be shattered. The memories of my life before prison, of the hopes I'd had, felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I found a quiet town a few states away, a place where I could blend in and live on my own terms. The locals were friendly, and there was an honesty in small-town life that was refreshing after the twisted games of city living. I took up a job at a woodworking shop, finding a strange comfort in building things with my hands, making something solid and real. Days became simple, a morning coffee, afternoons in the shop, evenings spent watching the sunset. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was peaceful, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Occasionally, though, I'd catch myself looking back, wondering if, somewhere down the line, I'd ever open up to someone again. Trust had become a distant, unfamiliar feeling, something that felt risky, like the edge of a cliff. People in town were kind, but I kept my distance. I couldn't help but think of Lena and the way she'd torn apart everything we'd built. The scars were there, invisible but deep, a reminder of a chapter I'd left behind but would always carry. One night, I sat by the window, looking out over the quiet, empty street, the faint hum of crickets breaking the silence. I wondered if Lena ever thought about me, if she ever regretted the choices she'd made, or if Victor, wherever he was, remembered the man whose life he'd tried to ruin. But these thoughts drifted away as I realized something else. I didn't need their remorse. I'd taken back my life, and that was enough. I couldn't erase the past, but I could choose to move forward. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I felt, for the first time, a strange, quiet sense of peace.